What's going on, guys? It's Houston Sports Talk back in the video today, and today the Houston Texans announced the initial 53-man roster was announced today for the Houston Texans. There was some surprising roster cuts. There was some surprising guys that made this 53-man roster. We're going to go all over it right now. We're going to go over position by position and everybody that made the roster. So 53 men made the roster. We're also going to talk about everybody that was waived or released or waived injured, everything. So let's go position by position, starting with offense and quarterback. So here are the QBs that made the roster. E.J. Perry was waived. So here are the QBs on the roster. The starter, C.J. Stroud, Davis Mills, and Case Keenum are your quarterbacks for 2023. The wide receivers, the Texans went with 6 wide receivers: Robert Woods, John Mechie III, Nico Collins, Tank Dell, Xavier Hutchinson, and Noah Brown. Here are the running backs and fullbacks on the roster: Mike Boone, Devin Singletary, Dameon Pierce. I thought there was a chance he would make the roster, but this one was a little bit of surprise that he did make the roster. Dare Ungabalawe, and at the fullback, Andrew Beck. So technically 5 players on the running backs and fullbacks section. And then tight ends, you have Brevin Jordan, Dalton Schultz, and Tegun Quantanaro. And here are the offensive linemen that made the 53-man roster: Jarrett Patterson, Shaq Mason, Juice Scruggs, Titus Howard, Josh Jones, George Fant, Lermy Tunsil, and Kendrick Green, who the Texans just traded for. Here's the defense. Defensive line: Will Anderson, Jonathan Gennard, Jerry Hughes, Dylan Horton, and Derek Rivers are your defensive ends. And then your defensive tackles, your defensive ends are Will Anderson Jr., Jonathan Gennard, Jerry Hughes, and Derek Rivers. And then defensive tackles are Kurt Heinisch, Hassan Ridgeway, Malik Collins, Sheldon Rankins, and Dylan Horton. Here are the linebackers for the Houston Texans: Denzel Perryman, Jake Hansen, Henry To'o, Christian Harris, Blake Cashman, and Novelli Hewitt. So surprise, surprise, Jake Hansen and Novelli Hewitt both make the roster, while some well-known linebackers like Corey Littleton and Christian Kirksey get cut. All right, here are your DBs: Jimmy Ward, Tavier Thomas, Jalen Petrie, Shaquille Griffin, Steven Nelson, Eric Murray, Derek Stingley Jr., MJ Stewart, and here are two surprises to the 53-man roster: Graylin Arnold, who had an interception in the final preseason game, and Gadar Holman both make the 53-man roster. I was a little upset that Cam Dantzler didn't make the roster. I think he would have been a stud for this defense, but sadly, he does not make the 53-man roster. And then special teams: your punter, Cameron Johnston; your kicker, Kaimi Fairbairn, of course; and your long snapper, John Weeks. And here is Tuesday's transactions. Here are the following players were waived: Tyler Beach, Thomas Booker V, Jalen Camp, Cameron Dantzler, Khalil Davis, Austin Deculus, Jared Dokes, Kobe Francis, Ali Gay, Brandon Hill, 7th-round draft pick in this year's draft, Johnny Johnson III, Darius Joner, Dalton Keene, Jimmy Morrissey, Jordan Murray, Adedeo Adedulier, E.J. Perry, Larry Roundtree, Garrett Wallow, Jared Wayne, and Ty Zentner. Here are the following players were released today: Rashad Coward, Brian Cowart, Michael Dieter. That was a surprise. To me, that was a surprising cut. Adam Humphries, Desmond King II. That's going to be the Texans are going to regret that. And they're not. That's a move. They're not going to pick him back up. Very upset they let him go. Christian Kirksey, Corey Littleton, Jacob Martin, D'Angelo Ross, Mason Shrek, Steven Sims, Eric Tomlinson, Nick Van Ed, and Chase Winovich. Here is the following players the following player is reserve injured: Kenyon Green, starting offensive lineman. Following players were waived because they're injured: Roy Lopez, Keaton Sutherland, and the following player physical unable to perform: Charlie Heck, and acquired via trade, Kendrick Green. So that is it for the 53-man roster. Surprise guys that made the roster: I'd go with Kurt Heinisch, That was certainly a surprise. Same thing goes for Derek Rivers making the 53-man roster. And then for the defense as well, Kadar Holman and Grayland Arnold making the roster. And then also Novelli Hewitt and Jake Hansen making the roster. Those were some surprise moves. And DeRay Ungabalaway also made the 53-man roster for the Houston Texans too. Those are guys right there that I wasn't sure if they would make the 53-man roster. I think Novelli Hewitt, him having a strong camp and him having a decent preseason, and him being really good on special teams is one of the reasons why he made the 53-man roster. And yeah, so, but keep in mind, guys, that the Texans do pick up 16 players for the practice squad tomorrow. So some of these guys that got waived and released tomorrow will have a good chance of being picked back up. There's a lot of these guys that were waived and released today that the Texans want to bring back to the practice squad. So there will be guys that will be picked back up that were waived or released today. So I doubt that you're gonna see some of those guys again that were waived or released. But yeah, you guys let me know your thoughts on the Texans 53-man roster. That's it for the video. Hope you guys enjoyed, and peace out. Go Texans.